Hi, everyone. Christian Coley here, back with From the Source, and I have an extremely special guest, a person from my past and now present, Vinda Souza from RefAssured. Hi, Vinda. Thanks for coming on.
Hi, Christian. Thanks for having me.
Blast from the past, but we've been talking for a little while, and I'm just like so excited that we're back and able to interact in the same ecosystem again. Just a little bit background for everyone. Vinda and I met when we both worked at Bullhorn, and we even created some content and videos around automation and AI. And so this isn't completely foreign to us. So I'm excited to get the band back together.
Absolutely. No, this feels very familiar and comfortable, and super excited. It has been a while, but it was amazing. I feel like we were together during a really special time, and everything felt very new and innovative and novel, and it was cool. It was good. It was a good time.
It was cool. And you were very helpful for me. I was like new to the staffing space and new to tech. And, I was like intimidated, like going up to Vinda, hey, do you want to do a video with me? Like, and do that. And I was trying to be creative, but you were awesome and very helpful for that. So I appreciated your help and guidance, getting my start in being creative in the marketing aspect of sales. So thank you. And so with this series, I like to kind of understand the person. I like to get into some industry topics and understand and really tap into your expertise.
Sure.
But I do want to understand just for fun, right? Like we're in staffing and recruiting. I like to talk about careers. Can you give me an idea of like, hey, where did you grow up? And like, what was your first job? I want to kind of understand how you ended up your first job and then how you ended up in staffing after that.
Absolutely. So I grew up in Saudi Arabia on an American expatriate compound on the beach called Ras Tanura. My dad was a petrochemical engineer for Aramco for 20 years. So he left Texas on assignment with my mom and my two older sisters, and then relocated in Saudi Arabia. And then I was born a couple of years later, and lived there until I was 15, which is the extent of schooling in Saudi, with a fantastic, diverse group of friends, who I knew extremely well from all over the world. And it was pretty awesome and idyllic, to be honest. Then when I was a sophomore in high school, we moved back to Texas, to Sugar Land. I went to Dulles High School, got heavily involved in debate. That was my extracurricular, which is, argument sports. And then
I'm not surprised by that, actually, that you were.
Yeah.
I didn't know that about you, but I'm not surprised.
Professional talking. Yeah, that's surprising to no one. Then I ended up going to Tufts for college. And so I moved over to Massachusetts, where my sisters were already sort of living and had settled down, and never left Massachusetts except for a sojourn over to study abroad in Paris, which was phenomenal. And like my heart belongs in France. And
really? Okay.
Yeah, loved it. Loved double major in English and French, minor in communications. And my first job technically was as a waitress at a Mexican restaurant called Tortuga in Sugar Land in Texas. The summer before I started college, I was really bad at it. I was very good at talking and getting good tips, and I couldn't carry the trays very well because I had a terrible sense of like balance with shoulder strength. And I kept dropping the trays everywhere. So my proudest accomplishment is when I finally managed to figure out my sense of balance and keep the trays steady, which as a waitress is pretty table stakes. And just to show you, everybody has a superpower, and that's not mine. But I loved chatting with people. And so I kind of knew communications was where it was at. And that's what I had kind of set my sights on anyway. How I got into staffing was I started my career in cause marketing, cause branding. So branding for large nonprofits, Cone, studying under the fairy godmother of cause branding, Carol Cone. She is a legend. And I realized after a while there that I kind of wanted to go on to tech. And I joined a tech PR agency called Pharma PR and stayed there for 5 years and rose through the ranks. And it was really wonderful experience. But I wanted to go client side. And instead of going a mile wide, I wanted to go a mile deep and get more ingrained in product and things of that nature. And I had a job offer from Bullhorn, and I had a job offer from another sort of ad tech company. And I decided to go with the ad tech company, even though there was a bunch of red flags blaring in my mind. And it was a mistake. And I was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? And I called Art Pappas, and I was like, I've messed up.
You owned it though.
I did. And he was like, don't worry. I'm like, can I make you coffee? And he laughed. And he's like, I think you can probably do a little bit more than that. So I joined Bullhorn to run marketing for this product called The Fit, which was a psychographic profiling app to help you find your dream job. It was a candidate app. And it was well before its time, but that transitioned into Bullhorn Reach, which was a social recruiting platform.
I remember these things. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then
it was before my time, but I'd heard about them. Yeah.
It was a fantastic solution. I think it was innovative and pivotal for the industry at the time. And that was 2012. And then that grew into content marketing and PR and thought leadership and social and communication strategy and all sorts of things. And as the company grew, I grew with it. And I spent 10 years there, and I developed some really amazing relationships with customers and analysts and influencers in the industry. And I just got to be very ingrained in the industry marketing components of it. And it was fantastic. Like, I was both intellectually satisfied, but also from a personal standpoint, really felt delighted by the authenticity of the relationships that we were building.
Yeah.
And I had a very, very warm place in my heart for staffing. So even when I left to go outside the industry, I found myself really pining to come back. And so I did for a while, even on the staffing operator side. And I joined a large enterprise staffing company running corporate communications. And that was a real wild shift from being in tech. But, always really having a love and loyalty for the staffing industry, which eventually led me to RefAssured, where I am now.
That's awesome. So there's one thing I want to touch on, which is funny. There's kind of a common thread. I've had a few guests on, and they've all spent time in services industry and for in restaurants and stuff. And I don't know if I can draw anything to that, but it's interesting because a lot of times it's a first time job for people that are younger. It's waiting tables and that's, but also it's very people oriented, and it's not a surprise that you all have found a way into an industry that's all about really people, right? And putting people to work, right? So that's really cool. That last thing you said though, about spending a couple years outside and even at a staffing agency, I think that's really kind of cool because you're at staffing technology vendors, but you actually got to spend time in a large recruiting organization. And so what kind of perspective did that give you with your time there, I guess, kind of going on the other side for a bit?
Yeah. So what's interesting is I think we had a certain confidence on the staffing technology side of things around what our customers want and what they need and how they operate. And that is largely accurate from the vantage point of understanding workflows and building technology that, creates amazing experiences for them and, focusing on addressing pain points. What I think people don't understand until they're working within that actual industry proper is just how chaotic it can feel. And just how many things are happening at once when you are in this sort of dual-sided function in which you serve both candidates and clients simultaneously. Because in tech, you really only serve the client, right? It's a customer-focused, from a marketing perspective at least, it's a customer-focused endeavor. And being on the actual agency side, I realized there are so many things that could go wrong at every moment. And there are so many stakeholders, especially in a large enterprise, that have a variety of unique demands, and you're trying to appease them 24/7 and avert any sort of obstacle that could fall in your path unexpectedly. And the level of not just intellect, which is extraordinarily high, but sophistication and process is it's unexpected and surprising. It's the most complex workplace I've ever been in. and it moves so quickly and people are constantly grinding that it really does start to illustrate the value of having that type of background when you're creating technology and services and products to meet the needs of that cohort of people, right? I mean, it's the same sort of criticism I think that we could all levy against vendors that we use as technologists, you on the sales side and me on the marketing side, when it feels like, oh, this person created a product and they don't understand what it is I do or what keeps me up at night. Like, it's kind of painfully obvious. And so it was a really valuable perspective to be like, okay, I get it now. This is actually a nice to have. It's not a need to have. That's a need to have.
Right. Yeah. That's so cool that you got to spend that time and get that perspective. And well, now you can bring that to your latest venture. So before we get into some questions I want to ask you, what are you all doing at RefAssured? I know you're doing some really cool things, and then it's really cool that you're able to get that experience on the staffing side and then now take that into a new role back on the staffing tech side and really solve for some key problems that people are facing.
For sure. Well, I'm really loving it at RefAssured. It's strong Bullhorn vibes, and when I say that, I mean that it feels like home the way Bullhorn did.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I see myself here now forever, right? And that's a rare feeling, right? Especially in this day and age. So RefAssured is a provider of automated reference checking for the staffing industry. That's the sort of textbook definition of what we do. But the reality of it is we're creating this compendium, the system of record for past performance data. So understanding candidate performance in a qualified way and being able to rate and measure degrees of quality. So it's not about just understanding, can a person do a job or not? It's understanding through credible vetted insight from the people who have worked with them before and can vouch for the quality of their work product, whether they are an A+, an A-, a B+, or a C player, or if they just don't meet the grade at all. And that is so valuable because it's not just around hard skills. It's around soft skills. It's around culture fit. It's around how they like to be managed, how to make them the most productive you possibly can as soon as they get in the seat. It's around understanding their likelihood of things like redeployment. There's so many ways that you can leverage this insight because of the way that we collect it. And the very user-centered and authentic, trustworthy nature of the insight. It's all human generated, right? It's like if I did a reference for you, Christian, I am not making things up. I'm not doing a best effort guess. I am speaking from the heart when I say this is what he's going to really shine at. And I would absolutely trust him in this type of role. Or, one of the issues that we run into now, especially with this new age of ubiquitous AI infused in every aspect of the recruiting lifecycle and process, is that it's unlocked tremendous efficiency and speed and impact in so many ways. And we're continually learning more and more as the technology gets increasingly powerful. One of the things, though, and I think we see this not just from the technology provider side, but also just everywhere around us, is the quality and credibility of information is called into question. We don't necessarily know, is this a fact or not, right? Like if I hold up this coffee cup, it doesn't mean that, I can't say it's a banana and people believe it, but actually there will be some people who do believe it's a banana. If I say it loudly and convincingly enough. We find that same issue potentially on certain aspects of candidate assessment and evaluation. So, for instance, I can create an AI generated resume that polishes and glosses over any number of my failings or gaps, right? I can also,
which of course there's none, but
which in my case, maybe there's none, except there's a lot. And I can also leverage that same type of technology to respond when a recruiter reaches out to me. And I'm a good interviewer by nature of just my ability to be unafraid to speak on the spot. There are a lot of people who are smarter than me and more talented than I am who do not have that level of confidence when they're on camera or in front of another person. And so they're going to flub the interview, And then there's some people who maybe are just like a facade with not a lot of substance behind, who are going to nail the interview. So if that's the only things that we're using to make a decision on who's right for a role and who's not, we're doing a tremendous disservice to the entire process. We're doing a disservice to the candidate. We're doing a disservice to the client, and the staffing agency themselves are leaving money on the table from a bill rate perspective, from a ratio perspective, from all sorts of vantage points. So what we've been able to unlock by nature of the insight that we propagate through RefAssured is this truly authentic and trustworthy look at candidate quality and fit and likelihood to succeed. And so far, we have 100% customer referenceability, which is something I've never had.
Wow.
At any company I've ever worked at. Mm-hmm. And we're doing everything in our power to keep that going. You know,
I love that. I love that. And I love what you guys are doing, because it's like really multifaceted value for the firm in those factors that you just said, but also from like a time consuming what the state of today is and compliance standpoint, because as I understand it, you know, some people have to like make sure they're hitting 2 references or 3 references. And a lot of times people are like calling them and can't get a hold of them. And so what you're doing to streamline that and kind of lessen the burden from like an overhead perspective and also compliance perspective is just like, it's game changing. So I love what you guys are doing there. A little change of gears now. I want to tap into the brilliant marketing mind that you are. How has marketing changed since you entered the industry? I know that's kind of a very broad question. I know AI might kind of be on this tail end of that. But yeah, how has it changed?
Well, Christian, I'm a dinosaur, so it's been a long time. And boy, so when I entered marketing or PR in 2006, which I'm going to pretend I was 9 years old.
Of course. You were brilliant, of course.
It's amazing. I'll be forever 21. Yeah. I'm like a clothing retailer. Everything was deliciously manual. I say that because I kind of do, in some ways, miss that time, because there was really, again, such an emphasis on quality and elbow grease. And we had to cut clips from print newspapers that had our client, and we called reporters on the phone, and sometimes we sent them faxes or letters to get them to cover us. And we knew exactly when they had to file for their deadline. It was usually Thursday afternoon. And we cultivated these relationships over months and years. And they either took our call or they didn't. And we had to dial for dollars and justify the taking of a chance, right? Because we were so thoughtful in how we communicated. And that has, that's a time that's long gone, right? We don't have a giant storeroom where we keep all our binders full of clips that we physically mail to our clients, right? First, print media largely went away and it was replaced by digital, and now digital has been evolved to eliminate a lot of the ombudsman, and now you see a lot of articles that are much more sort of tactically delivered. You don't have the same criteria necessary to justify publishing a piece. It doesn't need to be as well researched. It doesn't need to be as investigative. So I've seen PR certainly evolve very dramatically, always predicated on relationships, but just a different flavor of relationship. On the marketing side, I've seen different eras, and it's almost in some ways come back full circle. So it used to be in the earliest days of the modern era of marketing, so starting 1950s and after that, really focused on that branding, that creating an emotional connection with your customer or your prospective customer. And then you think back to things like Mad Men and, you know, that golden age.
That's where I went.
Right. The advertising and the copy that resonates and pulls you in and keeps you captive.
Yeah.
We then eventually reached, I think, the pinnacle of that in maybe the 80s and then early 90s. And then we started to realize that our attentions were being bifurcated and you know, increasingly more and more shallow by nature of the advent of the internet and the ubiquity of all these different stimulus. And as that happened, we started creating more snack-like content. And it was, if you look back at print magazines in the 70s, for instance, the amount of copy in those column inches is shocking by today's standards.
Oh my God. These days, TikTok brain,
I know.
you can't.
It's truly insane, right? And then you also even look at like children's programming, so Sesame Street and the episodes that I grew up watching and how quiet it was. And I tried to show my daughters an episode of Sesame Street the other day from like the early days. So not like the Elmo of today, but the earliest days of Sesame Street. And they were kind of like looking around and getting bored because I realized that like kids these days just don't have that type of attention span because that's not something they're used to. That's not a muscle that's been cultivated. So to that end, marketing meets the moment. And meets what the demand is. And so we saw, especially in the early aughts up until maybe like 2012, 13, 14, just this renaissance of demand generation. I feel like we maybe over-indexed on that a little bit. And we started to overcomplicate the ham sandwich and became like a function of knob tweaking, which was never something I was a fan of. I was like, why are we focused on the tactics of grabbing people's attention when we have no real thoughtful plan of how to retain them as customers? Because then our customer acquisition cost is going to go through the roof because we're just like throwing people into a leaky bucket and then that boat's going to sink. And then what are we any better for it? Like, we churned them. We lost that revenue.
Exactly.
Like, what's the point of just throwing money overboard, right? It doesn't make any sense. So I'd like to think that now we've come full circle and are focused a little bit more on creating meaningful connection and marketing and that full funnel journey. And customer marketing, which is a function I started at Bullhorn, and it's hard to imagine it was a newfangled thing 10 or 15 years ago, because now it's everywhere. And it's so valuable because I believe that all marketing is customer marketing. Your marketing, when you are doing the right things and you're communicating thoughtfully and you're putting somebody else's best interests at the center of what you do and operating outside in, inevitably you're going to have greater results because it's driven by empathy as opposed to driven by a sort of opportunistic desire to enrich yourself.
Right.
So when you're creating content that is intelligent and not surface level or silly, right? And when you're trying to evolve your product roadmap so that it meets the needs and desires of your customers, as opposed to just building things you think are cool in a vacuum because you're bored, like these are ways of being empathetic that inevitably generate greater results because people appreciate being listened to and they appreciate being understood. And that is the very essence of thought leadership and customer marketing. That is what I try to espouse with RefAssured, but ultimately I'd like to think is a trend we're seeing more broadly for the entire sort of functional landscape.
Yeah, I love that. And it's funny. That's kind of what brought me back into the staffing ecosystem here at SourceFlow, right? It's kind of less people, the staffing industry, particularly here in the US, I feel like the marketing function is actually maturing now more, and people are looking to create that meaningful connection and stand out with their brand. Whereas like before, that wasn't as much of a priority. And so it's really cool to kind of be a part of that now, and what you said. But how is AI? I mean, this is obviously like such a hot button topic. We could talk for hours, but I mean, I guess how is AI changing the marketing function in the last like even weeks, right? It could be even weeks, but months. How is that affecting marketing?
Yeah. So, I obviously it's disruptive, transformative. It's completely changed the game for almost everything it's touched, right? Marketing included. It's funny because I think a lot of technology vendors will say, well, AI allows humans to finally focus on more strategic and value-adding work. What's not being addressed is how do humans get to a point at which they're capable of being effective at strategic and value-adding work? And we think back to our earlier career days when we were training, and we were learning from the best, and we were watching, and we were doing, and we were rolling up our sleeves and doing a lot of that manual things, like that type of grunt work, for lack of a better term, that allowed us to appreciate what it meant to be in a more strategic seat, but also gave us the sort of intellectual wherewithal and experience and judgment to understand what good looks like. I am excited about the incredible efficiency improvements that are being afforded by ubiquitous AI. What I am concerned about from a marketing perspective is, are we, with a new generation of marketing talent, going to potentially be sacrificing that ability to cultivate the judgment and the ability to know that this is wrong and this is right? So those earliest days when I was a 22-year-old and I was cutting clips with an X-Acto knife may not look now to be like a valuable use of time, but I was reading everything I was cutting.
Yeah.
And it made me who I am. And now I still remember understanding the difference between good investigative journalism and poorly researched investigative journalism. And it informs my outreach with people and interactions even now. I don't want other folks to lose that. So I think that what we need to figure out from a marketing perspective is how to use these technologies as accretive and supportive to human potential, as opposed to replacing the need to learn.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the biggest part of that, right? It is, I don't want to call it like lazy, but you don't want people to kind of venture into that territory and not learn some of the fundamentals that you were able to learn, right? And kind of on their way to being a good marketer. So actually, I want to end with a couple things, but what advice would you give to staffing firms now that are placing a greater value on marketing and seeing it as kind of a revenue generation, not a cost center, right? I think I'm seeing that movement here as I spend more time on the marketing side. What advice would you give them as we head into 2025?
Yeah, I think that there is hopefully more popularity of marketing within staffing specifically, but if a staffing agency were to treat marketing as a little bit of a second thought, or maybe nest it within sales or something, I do caution them to reconsider. The reason being is that marketing is more than just revenue generating or revenue supporting. It's the owner of your relationship ultimately, right? It's your brand story. It's what makes you different than your competition. It's what helps to articulate the value that you provide to customers and candidates. And if you don't have a means of articulating that story, then there is a perennial risk of commoditization, which is a challenge across all of staffing. Whenever we ask staffing agencies, what makes you different? Well, it's our people. We have the best people. And then at RefAssured, we say, okay, prove it. Because how do you rate your people? How do you prove that this person's better than that person, right? Or better suited for a job? And then that remains to be seen, but also even in, okay, so how are you different from your competition? Because if everybody's saying, yes, we place the best people, but what's your secret sauce? And having a group of people who are passionate about the company and its differences in the culture and being able to articulate that in a really compelling and unique way is such a gift. So yes, I do think that marketing absolutely has an incredible impact on revenue, and they hold hands with sales. And it should be a well-oiled machine to understand, like, creating top of funnel demand through lead capture, and then nurturing them all the way through not just a decision, but the reverse funnel of creating customer advocacy and a completely different arm of sales, right? Through your customers, which are your most effective sales engine, really, a satisfied customer who's willing to say great things about you. But also, I think that we need to give more credit to brand marketing and being able to say, like, I saw something really interesting on LinkedIn the other day, and forgive me because I don't remember who posted this or even if they were the originator of the thought, but, marketing is, asking somebody to marry you, and brand is why they say yes.
Oh, I like that. Really like that.
Right? It's that long-term reputation.
Yeah, totally. And I'm seeing more of that, which is encouraging. Especially now, people are paying attention to their top of funnel. A lot of people are talking about sales a lot the last 6-12 months, but now needing more quality candidates to submit. And so creating that top of funnel as a kind of more well-oiled machine is super important. And then how do you stand out, right? You need to be able to stand out in the meantime, right? Your brand needs to be able to stand out while you're trying to increase kind of your reputation and your sales. So thank you for that insight. That's awesome. And I'm going to finish with a kind of funny question that I've asked everyone else. What was, if you can recall, your worst interview experience?
Well, obviously, some of the best ones come to mind.
Okay, of course.
but the worst one, and this company shall remain nameless, obviously, for professional courtesy. It was a healthcare technology company, and a very large one at that, very well known. And I was in consideration to kind of run corporate marketing there at one point in my career, and 16 separate interviews. 16.
Wow.
We've over-indexed
that
on
is
interviews.
Exactly. That's like I think that's validating for a lot of people to hear right now, because over the last several years, I think a lot more people have been looking for work and re-entering this and going through these processes. And it's just crazy how multi-step has gotten. And you're at the extreme of what I've ever heard. Yeah. But
that was bananas.
It borders on the unnecessary.
0 out of 5 stars.
Yeah, it's like, can we cut that in half and then kind of use RefAssured to understand what it's like to work with this person, right?
I know.
Right? It's like that could have saved a lot of heartache.
But that's a giant red flag, because from what I understand, actually, then the role didn't even move forward, right? It was just a giant debacle across the board. That is a red flag for candidates, and it's why I'm so proud to work with staffing agencies who really understand how to place talent. Right. Because that was an internal process. There was no agency involved. No agency would ever have stood for that. No. And that means not understanding the role, not understanding what you're looking for, not respecting the candidate's time at all. Right? I mean, not only did they necessarily lose me as a candidate for contention, but they lost me as an advocate for that company in any capacity. Like, I'm on the leadership board of a major hospital in Boston, and fortunately am well connected within the local healthcare community because it's a personal passion. And I have such a terrible opinion of this company now. Like, if that's how they kind of run their process, then I'm not particularly enthused about their services or their technology either. And that has really long-term effects. It's not just, we had an interview that we did with Joyce Russell, the legend that is Joyce Russell, a few weeks ago for our Ref Around the Edges podcast. And she even said, she's like, I like to onboard well and I like to offboard well. Like, it's not even just a matter of how I hire people. It's how I treat them. And when they're ready to leave, the dignity with which I treat them then too. People never forget how you made them feel, no matter what the nature of your interaction was. And that's, I think, one of the reasons I'm so proud to be at RefAssured. It's why people still have such a wonderful feeling as alumni of Bullhorn.
Yep.
Right?
That's exactly right.
They make you feel like $1 million. And those are the types of companies I want to work for. And those are the types of companies where I've had the greatest success. Places like Pharma and how they treated their clients, places like Bullhorn and how did they treat their customers and their employees, places like RefAssured, where, like, the first time I met Brian Vesey, sunlight filled my office. I sound really goofy saying that out loud, but I was like, hey, all gut vibes point to yes, right? Yeah. Sometimes you just need that feeling. You can't over calculate it. It just, it's right. And sometimes on the other side of things, when something's wrong, and, like, listen to your gut. It's probably not leading you astray.
Yeah, I think that's the lesson, right? Is like these things as staffing agencies, as corporations, like, these things really do matter and they have long tail effects. But also listen to your gut instincts, right? Is a major lesson. Vinda, thanks so much for coming on. That was a great story to end with. I think very appropriate. And hopefully we could do it again very soon.
Love it, Christian. Thanks. It's always a real pleasure to spend some time with you. And I'm super excited for what the future holds. So let's keep at it.
Same. So much. Thank you so much for coming on, and we'll do it again soon. Everyone, Vinda from The Source, thanks again.